my mother and my father are from the same tiny village in Guyana, but they actually met in New York City at a
Wow.
party. They met at a party in New York and had me, and ended up staying in the US after that. And so the beautiful thing about me being in Guyana, right now, is that this is the longest period of time that I've been here, and making the decision to live part time here in my ancestral home, my ancestral place of Guyana, has been very enriching for me, especially in terms of ancestral connections and us, falling more deeply in love with ourselves. Much love to Goddess Kira and Goddess Alicia and Goddess Lily, who are saying that they love the deck and they're getting the book and all of those things.
Lovely. So, growing up, how in touch were you with your Guyanese heritage? And is there, because I know within Guyana it's quite a very mixed and diverse culture. What was your experience then from your
So
parents?
it's very interesting. My parents are both, in addition to they're all they're multi hyphenates too, with, like, the Caribbean stereotype of 10 jobs, she got 10 jobs, like that. That's my parents. But a part of their multi hyphenate experience is that they're both educators. And so my father wrote one of the very first books that was about Guyanese heritage. He wrote it in the 1970s, and it was named Metaji. And at that time, it was self-published. And of course, there was no Amazon, no Kindle, whatever. So I remember in the 80s, my dad, like, having, stacks of books in the garage or in the car trunk, or, that kind of thing. My parents, we grew up, even though I grew up in New York City, I grew up very steeped in Caribbean culture, in African culture, in Guyanese culture. My sister, I remember us having chickens in my backyard in New York. My New York
Wow.
people know that what I'm talking about. The weird family with the chickens in the background, in the backyard, that was us. And so at the time, there was a lot that I didn't appreciate. Now I'm like, wow, this is beautiful that I had this experience. But as kids, you just want to just fit in.
Mm.
As kids, you just want to just be the same as everyone else. And I remember things like, trying to educate the bullies on my block when they were like, go back to your country, blah, 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 being like, well, actually, and explaining to them, like, well, we're all African and blah, 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 having these conversations with people who just wanted to beat me up for being different. And now, as I see that this was all necessary for me because of the things that I came to teach, the things that I came forward in order to teach.
Amazing. So you grew up in a household which really embraced their cultural heritage, and it was something that you witnessed around you. So this is something that has been consistent throughout your life path. So now that I'm hearing this, I'm like, it makes sense how you've gone on to create these works. So what I want to know is, at what point in your path did you feel like, because you mentioned before it was about fitting in, and that happens for most of us as, young people. At what stage in your journey did you think, "Do you know what, I'm going to claim this?" Because I noticed that you started more in the sort of entertainment world. You were a TV presenter at one point, right? So that's
Yes.
a stark contrast to the kind of spiritual teachings that you have now. So how did that all come about?
So one of the things, as I mentioned, my parents are multi hyphenates, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that my father is a minister and a spiritual teacher himself, and is initiated into several of our African traditions. And he grew up being persecuted, really, for being a spiritualist in Guyana when he was growing up. He grew up during the colonial era. And during that time, African spirituality was outlawed in Guyana. And he grew up hiding his drums, hiding the candles, hiding all of those things. So this, I grew up with altars in my house and all of those sorts of things that, like I said, were a big part of my culture, our culture, all of us who are watching this. And I had a very interesting experience where, I insisted at that time, like as a kid and as a teenager, that people call me Abby, because I didn't want the name Abiola because it was too weird and too African and all of that kind of stuff. Spirit said, okay, I got something for you. Got something for you, my daughter, as Spirit often does. And my first day in college, I had this amazing teacher who was of she was an Igbo, she is an Igbo woman who is married to someone who is Yoruba, either that or vice versa. Her name is Chikwenye Ogunyemi. And the very first day at Sarah Lawrence College, she called me, Miss Abby Abrams, into her office. She was assigned as my I think, I can't remember the name, but some sort of like, counselor, main teacher, or something like that. This is a predominantly white institution. And she called me into her office and she said, "You are having these people call you Abby?" And I was like, and I was like, yeah, 17, 18, like, yeah. And, I'm from New York. She's like, "That is not your name." I was like, "No." She's like, "What is your name?" I was like, "My name is Abiola." She's like, "Who gave you that name?" I was like, "My mother and my father." She's like, "Do you know what it means?" I'm like, "Yes, I know it means, born into wealth," and gave her the various meanings of my name. And she said, "Someone must think that you are very important to have given you that name. So why is it that you are here?" And pardon me, Miss Ogiyemi, for doing a very bad accent. "Why is it you are here having these people call you out of your name?" And she said, "Meditate on who you are and who you were born to be."
Wow.
And yeah, and I'm getting chills, thinking about it now. And I had started, this journey coming out of high school and coming into college, where, again, Spirit has sent one of my teachers in high school to me, who said, that she had gotten an assignment to read all of these African American authors like Toni Morrison and Maya Angelou, et cetera. And she came to me and she knew I was having problems fitting in to also a predominantly white institution, predominantly white girls' school. And she said, "I have to read these books. Let's read them together." And she was, a white teacher. And she said, "I have to read these Black books. Let's read them together." And so it was all a part of the foundation of me coming into myself and owning my voice and owning my truth.
Beautiful. And I'm glad you shared that journey with us. Thank you for sharing your experience, because this is something that a lot of us can relate to growing up. I personally myself have kind of witnessed this with other people who, as you mentioned, the whole shortening of the names and kind of wanting to hide away. So I thank you for shedding light on that. That's a major part of our healing that we need to address, and that kind of self-acceptance, particularly from a young age when we're trying to find ourselves. Sorry to the audience if you're wondering, I am not crying. I was burning some camphor and it's triggering my eyes. I burn it all the time, but for some reason I've got sensitive eyes today. So if you see me just suddenly doing that, I'm not crying. I am genuinely enjoying hearing Miss Abiola Abrams' story. And so I'm going to get more into this. So what I want to know as well is, so how did you make the transition? Because I know obviously you're still very much, your personality, everything shows that you are destined to do this kind of work, working with people. Are you still in the sort of entertainment world? And if so, how do you balance the entertainment versus the spiritual teachings?
So the interesting thing was that, one of the shows that I was hosting, this is back in like maybe 2009, 2010, something like that. I was hosting a show called the Best Shorts Film Competition, and it was on BET, Black Entertainment Network, on a spinoff of BET, of what became Centric, or BET Her, depending on where you live. And I was hosting this show, and during the time I was hosting this show, because I also made movies and, directed and wrote films and went to film school and all of that. During the time that I was doing this show, my marriage was falling apart. My first marriage was falling apart. And so in between, while hosting the show, I would bitch about, my ex-husband and my life, and, ramble on and all of this stuff, and all of the empowerment work that I was doing to heal myself while experiencing this. And so people started to write me, send in advice letters and ask for help and ask for advice about their relationships.
Okay.
And so I started to relate to them and then work with people as a coach, as a life coach, and then realize, oh, I better go and get some certification in this, that I'm working with people. And so it was a very interesting bridge, the way that it happened, in that way. And actually, let me rewind a little bit before that. I created a show, a theater piece called Goddess City. This is when I was graduating from college with a friend of mine. That was a 3-woman show. It was a bridge between spirituality and, as we were talking about, spirituality and entertainment. And it was a theater show called Goddess City, about us as women reclaiming our goddessness and our sense of power. And so I started doing goddess circles long before, a long time ago. Really, this is when, at the beginning of, in the early 00s, like 1999, like I said, graduating from college, and so at that time, nobody was talking about goddesses. Everybody thought it was totally weird. Everybody thought it was totally strange. So all of this was way underground for me. And in 2004, I went to Cuba, where I got my first initiation. And so again, this was all way underground. So for me, even right now, having written the book African Goddess Initiation, having put out several different decks about African goddesses and African spirituality, I still have within me where I have to remind myself, like, oh, it is safe to have these conversations. Because I have the DNA memory of my father hiding his altars and things like that way before I was born. And then in my lifetime, knowing that all of this was considered strange and weird and bad and evil and whatever, all of the things that are assigned to our spiritual voice.
Beautiful. Well explained. So I can see people in the comments just wanting to find out more. So just to confirm, this is the book we're referring to, African Goddess Initiation by Abiola Abrams, Sacred Rituals for Self-Love, Prosperity and Joy. Also in Abiola's background as well. And the oracle cards, which, I can't lie, this got me. This I had a set of oracle cards for like 14 years or something, and I just kept them. They were like my mermaid cards. I used them until I saw this and I saw the artwork, and it called me. It just was like, wow. And even when I use them, it feels so much more personal and relatable than anything else I've ever used. So I guess this is a nice way we can introduce ourselves into this conversation.
Yay.
Yay! So you can tell us about your journey into the book and the oracle deck, because as I said, they're phenomenal pieces of work.
Thank you so much. I feel very strongly that Spirit chose me for this work, and that the ancestors came to me at a time when I did not think that I was going to be putting this book out. I had a completely different book in my head. I had a completely different book written already, that I thought that it was that would have made the next logical step for me career-wise to put into the world. And the ancestors said, no, daughter, this is what is needed now. And so the book African Goddess Initiation and the deck, as you mentioned, are a journey through African spirituality, but not only African spirituality, but also the energy of the divine feminine. This is the era where our divine feminine energy is needed to complete our next stage of healing. And so I believe that every single part of this journey, things that we can't even fathom, are connected. Like you talked about me being a TV host, that all of that I believe was in preparation for this, for us to be having this conversation. Working with the amazing artist Destiny Powell, who was able to bring all of my spreadsheets and sketches and clips and notes to life, and help me to bring this deck forward. None of that was by accident. And so we are being called. And if you are watching this, if you are listening to this, if you are hearing this conversation in any way, shape, or form, no matter who you are, where you've been, or where you think you're going, let me tell you, you are not hearing this by accident. You are hearing this on purpose. And Spirit is calling you forward for a higher calling. And that's going to look different for each and every one of us. For some of you, it may be in your community, you being a community leader. For some of you, it may mean you have a world stage like Goddess Verona. It's going to look different for each of us. But for each of us, there's a tiny piece of, the cog of our evolution that we are coming forward, to lovingly create, so that our children and grandchildren don't have stories about having to hide who you are, or hide your altar, or shorten your name, or pretend in any way, shape, or form that you are anything other than the divine here in human flesh form. Yes, level up.
I'm just showing some of the amazing artwork. Can you say the artist's name again, please? You just said
yes.
it.
So the artist, her name is Destiny Powell. Destiny Powell. I'm going to show her name, which is on it's actually on the back of the deck. And I will share with you that when I first, this deck, like, as I said, my decks, when I first create them, they exist first as index cards. I sketch them out and they exist as index cards. And I knew that the artist that I wanted for this deck, I had in my mind and in my heart and my spirit who she was, but I didn't know who she was. And I was like, okay, I'm going to find this person. And when I found Destiny and her name is Destiny, referred to one person, to another person, to another person, to another person, it was when my publisher, my amazing publisher, Hay House, were at their wits' end, and they were like, okay, basically, like, today you need to decide. Today we need to know who this person is, or we are going to select for you. And they had amazing artists that they were going to select, and they had chosen other women of color. And I said, no, for this deck, the artist needs to be a person of African descent. And all love and respect to the people of color that they had. They had other people of color, but for this deck, I was told directly that the artist needed to be a person of African descent. This is an ancestral deck. And so when I saw Destiny's work and she wasn't replying to me, I tracked this sister down. I found her LinkedIn. I tracked somewhere through LinkedIn and through somewhere she worked and found a phone number. Sending text messages, emails, DMs, everything. And she said she thought first like there was like some kind of Instagram spam or something, because I was like, look, I'm trying to give you money, sis. I'm trying to give you X amount. When she saw the amount of money and everything, she thought it was like a scam. And then she said when she saw like text messages and all kind of stuff coming in, she's like, okay, maybe I better call back. Maybe this isn't a scam. Wow. And they were like, well, but she's never done this before. I was like, well, she will have done it when she did it now. No one has ever done anything before they've done it. It's true. And it's up to us, as just like you're doing right now, as an African woman here with your platform, having me as another African woman and helping me to bring forward my voice. This is what we do. This is each one bring one, each one teach one, each one show one, each one allow one. And so, yes, ashe, ashe, ashe. And so this deck is, like I said, it's a goddess deck. And the goddesses in this deck, like all of us as African folk, when they told me they were coming through, they decided to bring friends. So it's not only goddesses, but it also features our ancient queens and ancestors as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And so what I want to say is, because people are probably thinking, what is it that I personally like about this deck? And it's not just, for me, representation, just seeing cards that reflect images that look like me. But what blew me away, especially as being a researcher in the field of African spiritual philosophies and practices, to see all of these different names from all of these different cultures, not just in Africa, but in the diaspora as well. I was like blown away by the level of research, the detail. And so when you do use these cards, for me personally, it was just like, this is so much more real. I feel it. And for me, even if you don't like it as an oracle card set, this is a learning tool. Like, give it to your children. This is a way they can start embracing their heritage and learning about all these beautiful, amazing African deities, understanding who they are and what they represent. So I thank you. This is very powerful work. Because I mean, we met because you asked me to come onto your platform. At that point, I didn't know who you were, and you were like, "Yeah, check out my book." So yeah, you gave me like a draft copy or something. So I had a brief read, and then I eventually bought your cards. I saw the cards, and spirit got me. As soon as I saw it, I was like, "I want those cards." And then I used it for myself. I even got Dalian introduced to the cards. Like, I'm telling you, I felt it. So
That's
thank you so
beautiful.
much, man.
That
Thank
is
you.
beautiful. And I love that you talk about the research because, yes, me being, for example, I consider myself to be a scholar as well. My background is as a sociologist. That again, things that you think are irrelevant to your journey, that was a part of that. That's the reason why I believe the spirit was like, people can write other books, but there's no one else could have written this book or created these cards. And I'm sharing that not only to say like woohoo about me, but for each of you who are watching, that there are things that only you can do, only you, in the way that you are born to do it. Only Verona could create Ancestral Voices, be the co-creator of this platform in the way that she is, with the gifts that she brings in her specific background and her specific life and her specific husband. And there's a specific magic that we were all born to make. And so even though there have been, after my very first deck that I created years ago was called the African Goddess Affirmation Cards. And after that, a lot of other people started to create decks. But for me, as a person who is of Caribbean descent, of South American descent, descended from West Africa, not only from the Yoruba tradition, but also having Igbo and having Ashanti and other cultural bases. For me, it was important to put all of those voices, to bring those voices forward, so Mbuya Nehanda, who is a lion spirit, radical rebirth, who, right now, as we speak, her people are fighting to get her remains back from the colonizers, from Queen Victoria was sent her head as a tribute because she was a Zimbabwe freedom fighter who in her, I think her late 50s or early 60s, she realized that her people needed her and she was a healer, and she came forward as a freedom fighter, for her people. Having her magic, having access to her as an ancestor for all of us who are watching this is a part of the link that was missing, a part of the link in the chain that was missing. And a chain with missing links is going to be weaker. But what we have to do is we're each a part of these links. And so are our goddesses. So are our ancestors. And our ancestors did us a major, gift, where a lot of us think that, a lot of our heritage was just lost in the transatlantic slave trade and in, through colonization. It wasn't lost. Our ancestors hid our spirituality in our songs, in our tall tales, in our stories, in the ways, all of these things were hidden. And so this work that brings together so many different cultures from North Africa, West Africa, East Africa, Southern Africa, and all of us sprinkled throughout the diaspora, this is who we are and how we ascend, to our next level, whether you're talking about on a spiritual basis, an economic basis, just as folk, just as folks.